Hey there, everybody, and welcome to today's live webinar. We still have about 8 minutes before we get started, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who are, stayed up way too late last night and are having a difficult time kind of getting through the day today. So we may have some people arrive late. But I did want to get started early, like I usually do, to check in with everybody, to say hi, to see how things are going. I see people coming in. That's awesome. I am really glad to see you here. Hello, I'm going to get this right. Serendipitous synchronicity. I don't know why my tongue doesn't want to say that the first time through. I will have to practice it. But the more you come, the more I get to practice it. So that's awesome. Hello, Ty. I hope you are doing well. Good morning, Mallory. Hello, Spiritual Disco. How are you? Good morning, Lucretia. I am doing well, thank you. Considering I'm sleep deprived, I'm actually pretty happy with where I'm at. Hello, Teresa. Welcome back, as always. I believe everybody in here right now has been a long-term-ish subscriber, member, loving having you all here, loving having the consistency and continuity. We are definitely starting on a new series, if you will, today, looking more at mental health and aging. It's an area that I really haven't covered a lot, and there's a lot of fascinating stuff that we can consider. And since I'm aging, it is interesting to me, and we're also dealing with my husband's grandparents who are kind of going through similar things right now. So there's a lot of stuff. And, just like aging, we've got to take the good with the bad, and we've got to really focus on the facts in this context at this time to recognize what's going on. I'm just going to call her my grandmother instead of saying grandmother-in-law. I will sort of adopt her, I guess, for now. But my grandmother, for example, is really struggling with a lot of regrets and a lot of grief over aging. I mean, she's in her 90s and she's lost a step. And instead of focusing or even acknowledging the things that are going right and the things within her control, she's really kind of stuck in this quagmire right now of guilt and regret for not doing the things that she thought she should have done. So, that's really interesting to watch and painful to watch too, because we hate seeing her sad. We hate seeing anybody sad, or at least I do. Okay, hello, Diamond Mind. You are quite welcome, and I'm glad to see that you are joining from the UK. That's super awesome. And hello, Jason. Always good to see you. And Shad, always good to see you. Hello, Cheryl. Same to you. Always good to see you. Existential dread is one of those things that we're going to talk a lot more about next week. We're going to talk about the trauma of aging and really focus a lot on the emotional and cognitive aspects. Actually, let me turn on my fan too. Can you turn down the AC, please? All right. righty. Sorry, I don't usually get up in the middle of a recording, but it is really hot in here today. Let's see. Well, I definitely try to embrace the gratitude. Grace, I work on sometimes, physically and interpersonally, but I appreciate the words. Hello, Kim. Welcome. I can see where you'd be dealing with a lot of existential dread in your practice if 80% of the demographic in your area is over 65. I don't think it's quite that bad here in Lebanon. But we do have an older population. Definitely if you go down to like Polk County and Clearwater, Tampa, St. Pete, you'll see a lot of older people. You know, I don't really have a idea. I haven't looked at the census data to figure out what the proportion is of young people to older people in those areas. But it certainly is something that we're facing because the boomers are aging, and us Gen Xers aren't far behind. So we're all starting to hit that place right now. Hello, Allison. Oh, Fairhope, Alabama. Excellent, excellent. We were looking at moving to Alabama for a brief period. That's kind of gotten sidelined because I didn't get the job down there. But it's lovely down there. I really enjoy the people that I'm around. Hello, Patricia and Carol. Oh, hey, Adriana, I didn't even see you drop in. All right. You'll notice if you're taking this for CEUs in the classroom that I had to separate the quiz from the satisfaction survey because that's how New York requires that we do it. And now that we are approved in New York, I've got to kind of, do what they say. But I'd still really appreciate it if you would take the satisfaction survey because I have to turn those results in when I do my reaccreditation every 2 years. All right, we are at that time to get started. Hello, Lisa. Welcome. Glad to see you. Hello, Bridget, Terry, and Ashwarya. I hope I pronounced that right. Hello. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's presentation on mental health and aging, how physical changes impact mental health. I'm your host, Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes. In this presentation, we're going to explore physical changes that result from aging and discuss how those physical changes impact each piece of a person's life. Beginning at about age 40, our mind and body start to slow down a bit, and that includes how quickly we are producing human growth hormone, estrogen, testosterone. We start slowing down, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to recognize it and figure out how to adapt to it instead of digging in and pretending that we still have the body of a 20-year-old, because we don't. And that's in and of itself a whole grief issue for a lot of people. There are changes in every aspect of our bodies. These changes themselves can contribute to mood and cognitive issues. For example, reductions in testosterone and estrogen actually directly impact cognition, and you lose a level of neuroprotection. And these issues also contribute to grief over loss of functioning. As we realize that we're thinking more slowly, as we realize we ain't 20 anymore. There's a grieving period. Now, some people kind of shake it off. Some people have what we'll call a midlife crisis. Some people go into a deep depression and have difficulty feeling empowered and hopeful about the future. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. Think about it. Older people, and just think about older people that are in your life. And when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about my grandparents and, my mom and stuff. So they tend to be more set in their ways. Well, that's kind of that's a generalization, but it's very true for a lot of people. Why is that? Well, cognitively, they've slowed a little bit, and that slowing means it takes more time to register new things. And people who, when they keep their ways the same, when they're more set in their ways, it's more predictable. So it's easier. It doesn't take as much cognitive energy. It makes sense when you think about it, but we need to think about, why is grandma so rigid about these different things? They can be resistant to change for that same reason. And another thing that we see, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's okay, is a lot of people, as they start to notice their aging, they want to retain control. They want to prove that they've still got it. They want to not experience physical change. They're going to deny that they need grab bars. They may deny that they need hearing aids, for example. Part of that is because, for some people, is because those things represent weakness to them. Those things represent their impending physical failure in some way. They can be irritable. Well, if things are more difficult to do on a daily basis, if you're frustrated about it, if you feel powerless because your body's just kind of starting to give out a little bit, then it can make you more irritable. If people are trying to change things and take your power away, of course, you're probably going to get irritable. Even if their heart is totally in the right place, it can feel disempowering. Some people will feel depressed. And a lot of older adults go through periods where they feel depressed because they've had a significant loss physically, for example, or they have had a set of friends pass away. And my stepfather, he was much older than my mother, and his colleagues and his friends were dying for the last 10 years of his life. And he was the one that kept going. And every time one of them passed away, it was very poignant for him. And sometimes older people can seem, I should have put seem in front of that, irrational. And we need to back up, because behavior's communication. What are they communicating? What are they believing? We recently had a caseworker come in to try to help my grandparents. And the caseworker did not approach them with an empowering, strengths-based attitude, and came in and did an assessment and then said, okay, we're going to do a cognitive assessment right now. To my grandmother, that meant, you're trying to prove that I'm crazy and put me in a home. And she kicked the caseworker out of the house. From the objective standpoint, I know what she was trying to do, but and I think my parents knew what she was trying to do, but Granny was already stressed out. She was already feeling disempowered because somebody was having to come in to figure out how to help her age in place. And then they talked about a cognitive interview. That's jargony. And without telling the person why you're doing it ahead of time, I can see how she would jump to that conclusion and act to what it felt to the caseworker was irrational, it was perfectly rational. She's like, oh, heck to the no. I'm not going anywhere. I'm aging in place. I don't care what you say. Okay. We need to back out, get the bigger picture, put yourself in their position and think, what did that mean when the caseworker said that? What did that mean when you found out that you were going to have a pacemaker put in? What did that mean to you? So let's talk about some of these physical changes. Hormone changes. That's the one that a lot of people talk about, so we're going to start with that one. But as you know, if you've watched prior videos, these hormone changes impact every aspect of life. Hormones are not just for reproduction. As we lose estrogen, we lose neuroprotection. When we get stressed, remember, it creates a toxic environment in our brain. And estrogen helps buffer against that toxicity. As we lose estrogen, we lose that buffer, so it becomes more fragile, if you will, in the brain. That's why stress management can be so important for people, to help them slow cognitive decline, to help them strengthen the neurons that are there. And you can still, if you're breathing, you can still build neurons. You can still cause or create neurogenesis. When we have low estrogen, we see reduced serotonin, our feel-good chemical. We see reduced dopamine, which is involved in energy and motivation, among other things. We see reduced glutamate. That's our main energy excitatory neurochemical, and that goes down. So you're starting to see somebody who may start feeling depressed. We see reduced norepinephrine, which is partly for energy, partly for focus and attention. As those things go down, you're seeing mood go down, motivation, energy, and attention. Those are all things that in a younger person we would start throwing diagnoses at. This is a normal course of life. And some people will choose to go on hormone replacement therapy. I know somebody's going to say that. And that's true. And that is a choice for people to make with their doctor. However, for those who don't, we need to educate them about what's going on and then try to help them find ways to potentially naturally increase some of these neurotransmitters. Dopamine is increased when we do things that are pleasurable, that are good for us, because our body says, hey, I like that, or that's good for us, let's do it again. Help them look forward to things when we are motivated to do something because there's a reward out there. It can help a lot. So there are a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk a lot more about this next week, but we can help people sort of hack their neurotransmitter system, if you will. And when estrogen goes down, there's a reduced libido. There's also changes in the tissues in the gonadal area. Not going to get into that right now, but that can also make sex more painful or less enjoyable, and even if somebody is still wanting to have sex. Testosterone. Less testosterone, again, means reduced serotonin, reduced dopamine, and reduced acetylcholine. And again, reduced libido. We want to recognize, and I have those separated out, knowing that both sexes have estrogen and testosterone. However, in the male sex, the predominant hormone is testosterone. So they are going to be more strongly impacted when it starts to plummet. Likewise, the predominant gonadal hormone in females is estrogen. So when they start to reduce their estrogen production, then they're going to feel those feelings more. Progesterone is another gonadal hormone that we don't talk a lot about, but when we don't have enough progesterone, we actually see decreased GABA activity. Now, GABA is our main calming neurochemical. It's sort of like our natural Valium, if you will. And as GABA goes down, then we start seeing more anxiety, more irritability, more difficulty with emotion regulation. And again, both sexes have progesterone. We see decreased dopamine. Decreases in dopamine release in the striatum, which when people have enough, then their sensory motor functioning as well. So as dopamine goes down, we start to see problems with balance. We start to see problems with sensory motor things, with fine motor skills. And we know this as well because dopamine is also involved, low dopamine is also involved in Parkinson's and some of your other neurological disorders. We see decreases in dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, which prevents them from as effectively modulating emotional responses. Distress tolerance skills, huge. So we're losing the neuroprotection. We are also losing a little bit of ability to modulate emotional responses. And increased neuronal death in neurodegenerative conditions. If the person has a neurodegenerative condition like Alzheimer's, as dopamine goes down, the neuronal death rate is going to go up. The death of the neurons is going to go up. Even so, even for people who don't have neurodegenerative conditions, we need to recognize that the brain doesn't repair itself as quickly as it did in the day. And if we've got the loss of neuroprotection, we may see more decreases in the number of neurons. Oxytocin is yet another hormone, and oxytocin is sort of the darling right now in research because they're finding that it is associated with so many symptoms and so many other things. And just like your neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, glutamate, just like they are in a very delicate balance, your hormones are also in a delicate balance. And those two systems actually interact in a delicate balance. So when one starts to go wonky, we're probably going to see others get out of balance as well. Oxytocin, like estrogen and testosterone and progesterone, reduces with age. So you kind of see a trend here. What we used to be able to produce at 20, we're not able to produce at the same rate at 50. Just like when I was in my 20s, I was an avid runner and I was running 10Ks and didn't ever do a marathon. But, I was an avid runner. And today, 5K, my knees tell me that's quite enough. Thank you very much. So my body cannot do it can do the same thing. I can still run, but not to the same extent that it did before. As oxytocin is reduced, we see decreases in serotonin, our mood stabilizing chemical. And remember, serotonin is important for sleep as well because it's broken down to make melatonin. Now let's think. People who are older tend to have sleep difficulties. Wonder why? Well, they've got a lot on their plate, but the serotonin, as it decreases, that means we're having decreased amounts of melatonin as well. So even if they're not depressed, even if they're not anxious, even if they're not in pain, they may have more difficulty sleeping because of that serotonin deficit. There's decreases in GABA and estrogen activity. So not only are you not producing as much estrogen, but you also may, as oxytocin goes low, estrogen may not be as available. And it negatively impacts dopamine-related functions like motivation, reward processing, and again, sensory motor functions. Caveat. Older adults generally show larger increases in oxytocin levels in response to emotional stimuli compared to younger individuals. And this is another one of those we'll call it a hormone hack here. We know that we can increase oxytocin by petting an animal, by getting a hug, by even doing something nice for somebody. We don't even have to touch. We can just do something nice for somebody, and it increases oxytocin. Oxytocin is increased a lot more when it's in real life. They found that the oxytocin release, if you're doing a Zoom call with your grandkids, is not the same as if you're in the same room. However, we're starting to see how important oxytocin is in maintenance of mood and all of our bodily systems. That being said, there are a lot of things that older adults can do to increase their oxytocin. Prosocial behavior, they can volunteer, they can go to places, it doesn't have to be the somewhere that's designed for older adults, but they can go places where they can volunteer and interact with people. They can empathize with others, and that can be really helpful. They can pet, like I said, pet an animal. That's the one that usually comes up because there may be your spouse passed away or something. So somebody may not have another adult that they can snuggle up with at night. But what can you do to increase that oxytocin? What can you do to increase that bonding? And that's oxytocin is your bonding hormone. It's really easy to think, what activities might this person engage in that helps them feel more connected to others or other animals? And we can go from there. Thyroid reductions, another hormone. Thyroid reductions with age in up to 16% of individuals over 60 experiencing hypothyroidism. Up to 16%. That's almost 1 in 5 people over the age of 60. Part of that, I would hypothesize, would be the alterations in the other hormones. Because you remember your HPA axis, your stress response system, your HPG axis, your gonadal system, and your HPT axis, the thyroid system. They all interact when we're under stress. When our autonomic nervous system kicks off, they all go into high gear. So if we're seeing reductions in those other areas, it makes sense that we might see reductions in thyroid functioning. Likewise, we've talked in other videos about how a common side effect of chronic stress is reduction in thyroid effectiveness, if not a reduction in thyroid hormones altogether. We do want to pay attention to these things. These hormones are things that doctors can test for. I know I sound like a broken record with that, but it's so easy to test for those. Even if somebody doesn't want to go on estrogen or testosterone hormone replacement therapy. And yes, as testosterone goes down, like I showed you, it impacts mood and cognition and those neurotransmitters. So some people will consider gonadal hormone replacement therapy. Others say no for a variety of reasons, and that's cool. However, we also want to make sure that we're monitoring their thyroid. When we start to experience hypothyroid, what are the symptoms of hypothyroid? Depression, basically, this fatigue, difficulty sleeping, lack of appetite, apathy, all those things that you might diagnose as depression could be hypothyroid. So let's take a look. People with hypothyroid have impaired cognition, which leads to reduced glucose metabolism, changes in blood flow, and altered neurotransmitters. As their thyroid goes down, their metabolic rate goes down, which means they're not using blood sugar as fast. The brain is one of the largest consumers of blood glucose. And if the brain's not consuming it as fast, then it's not as energetic. It's more like the tortoise instead of the hare now. And the lack of blood flow, or changes, not lack, the changes in blood flow reduce the oxygenation. And we all know that reduced oxygenation is not good for cognition, and it leads to alterations in the neurotransmitter levels. Metabolism slows down, and it's not only the blood sugar consumption that's altered. As your metabolism slows, it also affects how medicines and alcohol and other drugs are processed. Your body can't excrete them or process them as quickly as they used to. And there are some medicines like your benzodiazepines that can very quickly become toxic in somebody who is older, even if they don't have impaired liver functioning from something else like alcoholism. By virtue of their age and the amount of time it takes their body to clear the medicines, taking what they would have taken at 20 at the same rate, like every 4 hours, their body may not be able to clear it fast enough, so it may build up to toxic levels in the liver very quickly. And I've seen it happen, and it's a tragedy when it does. Subclinical hyperthyroidism raises the risk of dementia in the elderly. And I thought that was interesting because I would have thought, because of the cognitive slowing and stuff, it would have been hypothyroidism. But I double and triple checked the research, and it shows that people with an overactive thyroid actually have a higher risk of dementia. So that was interesting. Other things that we see in physical changes in liver functioning and kidney functioning. The liver and the kidney get rid of toxins. That's their job. The liver does some other things too, but gets rid of toxins and maintains, the kidneys help maintain the fluid balance in our systems. So when they become less efficient, less effective, then it's easier for fluid balance to get out of whack. And there are a lot of medications that older adults are on that are sensitive to hydration levels. And the liver, as I already mentioned, not only because of the slowed metabolism, but because of slowed functioning in the liver, it's just getting old, the body takes longer to get rid of toxins, not just medicines, but any toxin that the person is exposed to. Thinning of skin is another thing we see in adults that we take for granted. I know I did until a couple of years ago. But as our skin thins, we're less able to convert sunlight to vitamin D. And it takes longer for the skin to heal because the cells don't regenerate quite as quickly. But the thinning of the skin can reduce vitamin D levels, especially if that is a main source of the person's vitamin D. Taking that into account, again, that's another one of those that's going to show up on a blood test, super easy to figure out, super easy for the doctor to look at. But symptoms of low vitamin D can include cognitive problems, depressive symptoms, and increased pain issues, as well as reduced immunity and increased inflammation. All of those things we've talked about can contribute to additional mood issues. Remember, everything feeds in on itself. You can't just have a vitamin D deficiency and it doesn't affect anything else. It affects every other piece of life. As we get older, our cell membranes become less able to absorb nutrients and remove waste. We eat food, it's broken down in the gut. It is separated into its component parts to make whatever it's supposed to make, and the waste products are removed. That's how it's supposed to work. But as we age, if our cell membranes can't absorb nutrients as efficiently, then just like somebody who has inflammation in their GI tract as a younger person can't absorb those nutrients, the older adult has more difficulty absorbing those nutrients, which means they may be on the surface eating a healthy diet, but malnourished. They may not be getting enough of what they eat actually absorbed into their system. Older adults, and to that end, we do need to make sure that older adults are eating somewhat healthfully. I mean, yeah, everybody is going to eat. They're adults. They're going to choose to eat what they eat. But just like anybody else, we want to encourage them to have 3 colors on their plate, encourage them to monitor what they eat. And for a lot of the boomer population, they grew up in a time where vegetables were cooked until they were soggy and gray, which takes out most of the nutrients. Finding that happy medium. A lot of older adults have dentures now, so they have harder time chewing and breaking down food. So we need to find that sweet spot between the raw foods, which may be too difficult to digest, and the overly processed, overly cooked, nutrient depleted foods that are out there. And in this day and age, there are a lot of dehydrated or freeze-dried powders that can be mixed into smoothies or shakes or whatever, if the older adult is willing to do that. But we need to explore and experiment with the older adult, always leaving it up to them, educating when needed, and putting it out there and asking them, do you want to change this? It's not up to us to change things for them. It's up to us to empower them to decide what changes they want to make. Physically, there's a longer recovery time due to the cells having more difficulty dividing and, knitting back together, is what my doctor said after my last surgery. But recognizing that older adults, their skin's more fragile, so they may get bruises and bumps and cuts more easily, but it's also going to take them longer to heal. We want to keep an eye on that, or encourage them to keep an eye on that to prevent any opportunistic infections from happening. Generally, when we're talking about skin injuries, that's really what we've got to worry about. But when we're talking about muscle or tendon injuries or organ injuries, they're going to take longer. It's going to take longer to recover from open heart surgery at 70 than it is at 27. It just takes the body longer. Helping people recognize that and be patient with themselves, helping them embrace the dialectics, helping them. Hardiness is a concept that they actually use for patients that underwent open heart surgery. And it says, identify all the things that are important in your rich and meaningful life and focus on not only the thing that's going wrong, but the things that are going right. And then identify the things in your life that are going right that you can control. And what about this heart surgery? Okay. It sucked. You didn't want to have it. It happened. It's done. What can you do now? What is in your control to expedite your recovery and get back to living the life that you want? So that's the identifying what they can control and then viewing it as a challenge, helping people set those SMART goals so they can move forward in their recovery. There was a lady I worked with a couple of weeks ago who fell out of bed and she broke her arm and her hip in the fall. Oh my gosh. And, bless her heart, she was having a dickens of a time because, granted it hurt and she was having some ongoing pain as a result of the surgery. But there were other things that she couldn't do because of the injury that weren't getting tended to as much as they needed to be. So we had to bring this to the attention of the care team. But like washing her hair. With a broken arm that just had surgery, she couldn't wash her hair. And I've been there. I've had my hand in a cast, and you think, well, you pour the shampoo on and then you do it with one hand. It's not as easy as you might think. And those are things we want to make sure that people feel as comfortable as they can in their own skin, in their own body. So if they feel dirty and grimy and their hair feels greasy and they feel ugly looking, how is that going to impact their mood? How is that going to impact their desire to interact with others? How's it going to impact their self-esteem? The same thing is true, and I'm getting off on a tangent, but oh well, about getting into day clothes. If you're working with an older adult in an skilled nursing care, long-term care, nursing home, assisted living facility, different levels, whatever it is. But if you're working with somebody who is not having to leave the building and you find that they're staying in their night clothes all day long and all night long, and maybe not even, showering every day, that's something we need to take a look at. A lot of us saw, maybe a little too much self-disclosure, during COVID. During the lockdowns, when we got out of our routines, I used to go to the gym every single day, shower at the gym, go to work, do my thing. And during the lockdowns, I wasn't going to the gym. And for a little while there, I wasn't working out either. And I noticed there were a few times, and my mother-in-law says that my father-in-law did the same thing, that it was like a couple of days. And I was like, hey, I've been wearing these same clothes for like 4 days now, probably ought to shower. I'm probably gross. But it hadn't occurred to me. And I felt so much better after I was, clean. Imagine that. I know y'all are like, ew, that's gross. But it can be easy for time to get away, especially if you're not doing the normal things. And when people are injured, or when people are taken out of their regular home and they're in a skilled nursing facility, their schedule's all changed and they may forget. It happens. And there's a loss of lean muscle mass. One of the things they suggest, and obviously this needs to be cleared by people's doctors, is that older adults regularly engage in exercise, and preferably some resistance exercise 3 times a week. Why is that? Because that stimulates the growth hormone, that stimulates the development of lean muscle mass. When we lose lean muscle mass, it makes it harder to pick up things. Our muscles aren't able to protect our joints as well. We're more susceptible to injury. We have more difficulty, maintaining balance. If our proprioceptive abilities gets off balance, if we start feeling dizzy or whatever, it's harder for our muscles to catch our body if we've gotten really weak. So loss of lean muscle mass is another thing we can encourage people to do. Benefits is it typically increases metabolic rate, which even if their thyroid's a little low, it can help buffer against that. It tends to increase oxygenation because they're breathing a little bit heavier when they're doing their resistance exercises. And it doesn't have to be weightlifting. They can use bands to do something. I worked with one woman who was an older woman, and she didn't drive or anything, so she couldn't go to a gym. We used soup cans for her to do resistance training with. And yes, it was light, but it was better than nothing. And gradually, she progressed to lifting other things like eventually she got up to a gallon of milk on each arm. But those are things we just need to be creative. If somebody's willing to do it, there are a lot of different isometric exercises people can do. And we can talk about that in another video that focuses more on physical therapy and physical rehab. Stiffer arteries. This is one of those things that as we age and as our hormones change, believe it or not, our gonadal hormones actually impact the elasticity of our arteries. But as our hormones change, our arteries can get stiffer, which can make us more susceptible to hypertension and other cardiovascular diseases. It's one of those things, if we're taking care of the rest, the hormones and everything else as best as we can mitigate it, but as the body starts to age, the arteries will become, less pliable. Helping people acknowledge that and do what they can, work with their doctor to minimize this. Whatever they need to do for changing their diet or exercise, reducing their blood pressure, etc. There's a reduced ability to get oxygen from the blood. So not only are the cells having a hard time absorbing nutrients, but it's also oxygen. Partly because it is, if the metabolic rate is lower, then the rate of blood circulation is lower. Part of it's because some older adults may tend to be a lot more sedentary than they were when they were working. There's a lot of reasons, but helping people get oxygen into their system so their blood has a chance of delivering it to the cells is really helpful. Deep breathing, combat breathing, square breathing, tactical breathing, whatever you want to call it. A lot of guys prefer combat breathing or tactical breathing as opposed to some of the other terms that we have for it. Whatever works, but we want them to deep breathe. We want them to inhale. Now, this can happen as a part of Tai Chi or yoga or walking or resistance exercises, or if they're bedridden for some reason, maybe they just had that open heart surgery, it's something that they can do without having to get up. And that can be important, even if somebody has a broken foot or hip or something. There are ways we can help them increase their oxygenation. Your lung tissues lose elasticity, which reduces maximum breathing capacity. Again, that's going to reduce how much oxygen gets into your body. When your oxygen gets low, you start feeling symptoms of fatigue, cognitive fog, brain fog, and sometimes depressed if it goes on for too long. And helping people understand why breathing is so important. And I know that sounds stupid to say, but as we age, we actually need to work harder at making sure we're getting enough oxygen. We're breathing deeply, not breathing through our chest and shallowly as we watch TV. We are moving around, etc. And bladder changes increase urination frequency for both sexes. It's something that happens. Why do we care? Well, if you're getting up 6 times a night to go pee, then you're not getting good quality sleep. If you're not getting good quality sleep, it's going to activate that stress response, create some neurotoxicity up here, make it more difficult to deal with life on life's terms, increase the rate of intrusive thoughts and cognitions, because we know sleep deprivation is directly correlated to negative thoughts and difficulty controlling ruminations. So you can see how sleep is so incredibly important. The older adult is already fighting against that serotonin deficit. Now we also have to, that may be impairing their sleep. We also have to accommodate the bladder changes. Assuming it's not a pathological bladder change like an enlarged prostate or something, which the doctor would address, encouraging people to pay attention to how much they drink before bed. It's really pretty simple. Some older adults will choose to wear Depends or something else at night so they don't have to get up, but they can drink as much as they want. That's their choice. But other adults will choose, well, I'm going to stop drinking after 3 in the afternoon. And in the evening, if I get thirsty, I'll just suck on some ice chips or something. Because that's not going to be so much that it really prompts the need to urinate. I can't imagine somebody eating quite that much ice. But there are workarounds that can be considered. When they do go to the bathroom, if they've still got to get up, okay, fine. Instead of getting angry about it and triggering that stress response, okay, I'm up. Make sure that they have a clear path to the bathroom so they don't fall, so they don't injure themselves. And ideally, have a light in there, whether it's attached to the switch or it's just a night light that stays on all night, that is red. That avoids triggering the blue light sensors in the brain and getting the circadian rhythms thinking it's daytime. A bright red light in the bathroom is something that's doable, just like the exit signs that we have, in theaters and stuff. The brain loses some structures connecting nerve cells, leading to slowed reflexes and cognitive slowing. Cognitive slowing is a natural part of aging. Because it takes them longer to remember something, or you tell them something and it takes them a minute to process what you told them, or they forget more often, that's not necessarily dementia. It's likely a sign of aging, especially if it's something gradual. If you notice significant sudden changes, obviously get evaluated. But assuming, and a lot of older adults are terrified of those cognitive exams because they know they've slowed and they're afraid that somebody's going to, as my grandmother says, put them in a home, because they can't think as quickly anymore. They can't move as quickly anymore. Just like if, for all of you who are out here that are therapists, you've probably worked with people who have been suicidal before. And just like we want people to not fear telling us when they're having suicidal thoughts or ideations, we want people to feel comfortable telling us about their cognitive slowing. Just because somebody is feeling depressed and having suicidal thoughts doesn't necessarily mean that they are needing to be hospitalized. There's a lot of room in there for social support and, how intense the feelings are, etc. So we want to help people recognize the same thing for cognitive slowing. There are a lot of things that we can do, especially these days, that can help people stay in their home longer. When my mom's mom was older, they didn't yet have grocery delivery. They didn't yet have a lot of the services that she would have required to age in place. And so eventually she ended up having to go to a long-term care facility, partly because she kept forgetting and leaving the stove on, which became an issue. It did become a safety issue with her. But there are a lot of options out there. There are a lot of different technologies that you can use right now. And I should do an entire video on all the technologies. We've done a deep dive into technologies for helping people age in place lately. And there's just some fascinating things. Like there's one device that you can put, for example, on the refrigerator. And if your loved one typically gets up in the morning and opens the refrigerator to get milk out to put in their coffee, about 6 o'clock or whatever, the computer knows that. And if the person hasn't gotten their coffee, gotten their milk out of the refrigerator that day for a certain period of time, and you can set it. So if it's been like 3 hours since they should have gotten up, the system will notify the caregiver, even if the caregiver is like 100 miles away, so they can call. It's not like it's calling the emergency services or something, but it notifies the caregiver and it's like, hey, mom hasn't made her coffee yet this morning. You might want to check in on her. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Because I know for me, every morning, like clockwork, I make my coffee. And if I haven't done that, then there's probably a problem. There's decreased visual acuity, peripheral vision, and depth perception. It's harder to see things. And with difficulty with peripheral vision, there are more trip and fall hazards. Same thing with depth perception. If you can't tell how far away the chair is or the dog that's laying on the floor, there's a lot more trip and fall hazards, which is why it's important to evaluate the environment to make sure that you're accommodating the changes in vision. People who have changes in vision and hearing are both at higher risk of dementia. Interesting. They hypothesize that if it's gone unattended, when people can't see well enough to get around, it's stressful. When people can't hear well enough to understand conversations, they may feel isolated. They may feel depressed. They may get confused or get angry that they can't hear and understand what's going on. And all of that stress can increase the neurotoxicity, leading to increased neurodegeneration and progression of cognitive decline at a much higher rate. So I thought that was an interesting thing. And I actually covered that in the video I have on, I think it's 20 things you can do to reduce your risk of dementia. But in any event, we need to pay attention to vision and hearing for cognitive reasons to prevent dementia, but we also need to pay attention to these things for safety reasons and empowering the person to figure out what do they need to do in their environment so they can continue to age in place, so they can continue to feel safe in their environment. And there's a diminished sense of taste due to fewer taste buds. Who knew? You even lose taste buds. There's less saliva, a declining ability to smell. We know if you've had an illness, even if it's a cold and your nose has been all stopped up and you couldn't smell anything, if you can't smell, you can't really taste. And if you can't really taste, then eating food is it's not nearly as appealing. When we smell good food, it triggers our hunger receptors. And if you can't smell as well, then you may not have as much desire to eat. And working with people to figure out how to increase their appetite if they're having difficulty wanting to eat is really important. Accommodating neurological changes that may result in things that used to smell really good, like dark coffee, a person may find noxious as they get older. It's just like they haven't lost the ability to smell it, but it smells different. It doesn't smell good anymore. Okay, let's figure out how to address that issue. Ultimately, the biggest issue, I think, is making sure that they have the desire to eat a healthy, nutritious diet to fuel that body factory. And I didn't put it on here about the dentures, but that is another important thing to remember. When we eat, we chew. When we chew, we break down the food, and the saliva helps break down the food, step one, if you will, in your mouth. So if you have less saliva, your body's less able to complete step one. And a lot of older adults don't chew their food enough, so they're not breaking it down in the mouth. And we know that chewing stimulates the vagus nerve. And if they're not chewing as much, then we may need to do other things to help stimulate that vagus nerve. But the take home is if the person is not able to chew their food and break it down enough where the body can actually extract the nutrients from it as well as it can, despite the cells kind of having a difficult time too, then we're going to start seeing some nutrient deficiencies, and figuring out how to work around those is really important. And I personally don't think the shakes, the meal replacement shakes that some people ingest are necessarily the total solution. They're helpful for some people, but you don't want to be drinking those for every meal every day. I wouldn't, but that's me. Okay, so let's talk about how some of these physical changes impact the rest of the person. Self-esteem. Put yourself in their shoes. How will you feel when you can't do stuff that you could do 20 years ago? You can't do stuff today that you were able to do a week ago. My grandparents hate being dependent on other people. It makes them feel weak. It makes them feel, their words, not mine, useless. And working with people, What does this change that your body's going through, what does this change mean about you? What are you afraid people are going to think of you? What do you think about yourself? And work through the grieving process, because it is a grieving process. As you lose function, you've got to grieve it. And find ways to enhance their self-esteem. Find ways to help them notice the things that they can do that maybe now that maybe they weren't doing before. Retirement is another interpersonal change that hits a lot of people really hard. That was a routine that goes away. That was a lot of people feel like they're needed in their job, so they don't have that anymore. And for a lot of people, a significant amount of their socialization comes from work. So when they don't have those people every day to hang out with, it's a huge change in their life, and they can feel isolated, lonely. They may feel resentful at the people who are still working, even though they had to retire. There are a lot of different feelings that can go on. They need to grieve it. They need to figure out, okay, I'm retired. How can I be retired and live my rich and meaningful life? How can I focus my energies that I used to use at work on nurturing those things that are important in my rich and meaningful life? Encouraging people to refocus what they're doing. There are activity changes. If they play golf or tennis, at a certain point, they may not be able to do it anymore. And that, for a lot of people, some of those activities are their big stress reliever. And when they can't do them anymore, they don't know what to do with their stress. Sewing, fine motor coordination. I can't crochet anymore because of my carpal tunnel. And that was difficult. My grandfather, as his Parkinson's got worse, he couldn't do woodworking anymore. And he made beautiful, beautiful miniatures. We need to recognize that when somebody loses something, and you may think, oh, okay, you can't play golf anymore, you'll find something else to do. No, that's a big thing, because the person feels powerless. They feel powerless. This thing I love doing, I don't have anymore. We need to recognize that sometimes there's a change in abilities. They just, no matter what interventions you have, they can't do it anymore. And again, that's the grieving process. For some, it's a change of endurance. Golf, maybe they can't walk 18 holes anymore. They've got to use the little cart, and they can only do 9 holes on any given day. Okay, well, still better than nothing. Maybe they get to the point where all they can do is go to the putting green or the driving range. They can't actually do an entire game, course, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So there are adaptations and modifications that we can look at. Loss of friends due to death. We talked about that a little bit. That can be devastating because it puts it front and center that your time is coming to an end. So there's a lot of existential anxiety. There can be some abandonment issues that are reopened. And then loss of friends due to dementia and neurodegenerative issues. When you see your friends decompensating right before your eyes, it can be terrifying. Your heart aches for them, and then there's a part of you going, oh my gosh, that could be me. So there tends to be an increase in some health anxiety. Difficulty communicating. If an elder doesn't have well-fitting dentures, it can be a problem. If they have difficulty hearing, it can be a problem. We want to make sure that the person feels able to interact and communicate effectively. We want to make sure they're hearing what we're saying and they feel like they're part of the conversation. That is huge in terms of making sure oxytocin levels stay up. They may have to move in with family, which some people, that's a huge change. There can be resentment on the part of the family. There can be guilt on the part of the elder that's moving in. So there's a lot of emotions that goes with this. And Feeling like people are hovering or abandoning them is another issue interpersonally that comes up. Emotionally, and I know we're coming to the end of this, so I'm going to go quickly through these because we're going to really hit emotional and cognitive and environmental in the upcoming weeks. But emotionally, these physical changes can provoke a lot of anxiety or anger or both. Remember, grief process, denial, anger, depression, acceptance. So it's normal for people to be angry when they can't do what they used to do, or fear having something happen, fear cancer or a heart attack or something. But we need to help them put it into perspective if they are developing health anxiety. There's anxiety and anger about their death, about their own mortality, and their loss of independence. There may be irritability due to communication difficulties. If they're trying to say something and the other person's not understanding it because they can't articulate well enough because they don't have teeth or their dentures don't fit right, that can be a problem. Depression can occur as a result of feeling hopeless and helpless to change the situation because you can't stop the clock. And this goes with that existential anxiety. Hormone changes, thyroid and gonadal, can contribute to depression. That's easy enough to figure out and address medically. And medication side effects, including statins, can contribute to depressive symptoms, especially in older adults. And then there's the whole issue that we're going to do a deep dive into next week on guilt and regret, the trauma that people endure as they are looking back over their life. And Erickson called it, I believe it was regret, was the final stage of development. But people do. They look back over their lives. Cognitively, there's slowed processing. People may have difficulty understanding things as quickly. When you tell them to do something, tell them one step at a time if they've really slowed. And because they can do it, they just can't take this litany of instructions that you're rattling off on them, which, because of the slowed processing, may cause challenges adapting to change. They start becoming afraid to do new things because people don't understand. They don't give them enough time. They feel inept because they don't understand as quickly. There's slowed retrieval, memory impairments, especially short-term. Interestingly, in a lot of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, long-term memory is intact. So reminiscence therapy is an intervention that can work really well to address some mood issues as well as agitation. And there can be pessimism about what's coming. You know, I screwed up my life and I don't have anything left, blah, blah, blah. And then suspiciousness of others, that you're trying to take my money, or you don't want me here, or you're trying to put me in a home. Backing up and exploring where those thoughts are coming from, what they're perceiving in the environment, what they're perceiving from your behaviors that are making them think that, and then helping them recognize the facts and context. Environmentally, vision impairments can make it more difficult to drive, can make them more vulnerable to trips and falls, make it more difficult to read or even watch TV. Trip and fall issues, we need to be aware of rugs, pets, and issues in the bathroom like slippery floors and needing grab bars. Those are all interventions that can be used. As people age, they may have difficulty getting in and out of the tub, the bed, or the toilet and need grab bars. But for a lot of people, it's really embarrassing to say, I can't get up off the toilet after I sit down. There are tons of assistive technologies or assistive devices out there that can be implemented to empower the person to maintain their independence for a lot longer. They may have difficulty reaching high places. If they reach up for that top cabinet, they may lose their balance and fall down, which is a problem. May have difficulty remembering to turn off the stove or not to put metal stuff in the microwave. And if they can't drive, they lose their independence to a certain extent because they can't take themselves to doctor's appointments or shopping or those other things. And they start having to rely on other people. And if family's not around and they're having to call buses or Ubers or whatever, that also may make them feel isolated and rejected because it's like, I don't have anybody who cares about me. Now, that may not be true, but it may feel that way to the older adult. The myriad of physical effects that occur as a result of aging have far-reaching impacts on each piece of life. And I didn't even begin to really do a deep dive into this yet. So we're just scratching the surface here. But start thinking, this is going on. How is this affecting each other piece of the person's life? Additionally, failure to adequately address each of the ISEs of a person's life that are impacted as a result of physical changes can worsen physical health issues. So as people start to get more depressed and stressed and angry, that's going to exacerbate the stress response and the neurotoxicity and the inflammation, and it's just a negative downward spiral. Are there any questions? I know I ran late, I apologize, but there was just so much really fascinating stuff out there that I think as clinicians and maybe even social workers, but definitely mental health counselors, we are not taught a lot about. And it makes so much more sense why grandma's behaving this way when we understand all of the things that are going on in grandma's body. I'm sorry to hear that, Kat. That is very difficult when somebody, and we'll talk about disability acceptance and adjustment in another video, because it's not just older people. There are people who have disabilities, neurodegenerative issues, etc., that lose their ability to communicate or to drive themselves or whatever. And that there are a lot of emotional issues that need to be addressed with that. So I feel for your neighbor, and losing the ability to communicate is so crucial. It would seem, I'm not them, I don't know how they feel, but to me, I would feel like I was a prisoner in my own body if I couldn't communicate with others. But it's great that she can somebody figured out how to help her communicate with her eyes. I have one patient that I'm working with right now who has Wernicke's aphasia. So whenever she does talk, she articulates words, but it's gibberish. And trying to figure out how to help her communicate, because you can see on her face how frustrating it is that people aren't understanding. And unfortunately, a lot of her care team doesn't really seem to care that much, but whatever. Okay, everybody, have an absolutely amazing rest of your day, and I will see you next week when we really talk about what I'm calling the trauma of aging and trauma-informed tools that we can help address some of those emotional and cognitive issues that not only the aging person, but also their family are going to be dealing with.